This is Coast to Coast AM with Art Bell.
It is indeed. Colm. That's the National Institute for Discovery Science, and has led the investigative project of NIDS for over actually 7 years now. And NIDS is the only fully funded organization in the entire U.S. that employs full-time PhD-level scientists on staff. NIDS also has a world-class science advisory board with 15 members drawn from many, many branches of science. Kelleher has a PhD in biochemistry, also wet lab research experience in molecular biology, virology, and biochemistry. He has led both the UFO investigative arm of NIDS as well as NIDS research into cattle mutilations. We're going to talk about the enigmatic black triangle phenomena. That's one of the very few things that I talk about on this program that I've had intimate personal experience with myself. And I mean as intimate as anybody would ever want to have. And I suppose one last time, I'll tell you about that in the course of this discussion coming right up. All right. One last time, and very quickly, just before Colm takes to the air here. One night, many years ago now, I worked in Las Vegas for KDWN radio at that time, and I used to commute back and forth from here to Las Vegas every single day. Well, Ramona and myself were on the way home. And, in fact, had almost made it home. Not more than, I don't know, a quarter, half mile at the most from here, as we were making one of the last turns toward the house. Ramona, who was in the driver's seat, said, "What the hell is that?" And I said, "What do you mean?" And she said, "Behind us." And so I pulled the car over and stopped on the side of the road. We had a little Geo Metro, a red. You'll have a Geo Metro, by the way, and pulled over to the side of the road, and we both got out and stood and watched this incredible black triangle approaching us from the rear. It was still approaching at that point as we stood by the car, and I'm telling you, folks, this mama was big. It was pure black. It could not have been more than, I'd estimate 150 feet above us. It was monstrous as it passed overhead. The stars and the nearly full moon at the time went away, just like in the movie, Close Encounters or whatever. This thing couldn't have been doing more than about 30 or 40 miles an hour, and maybe less. I'd say maybe 30 miles an hour. It was not flying, not as a conventional aircraft would fly. It was floating. Not only was it floating or defying gravity, however you wish it, it was making no noise whatsoever, no apparent propulsion system whatsoever. It was so quiet you could hear crickets a quarter of a mile away, half mile away. And it was so close, I felt like I could have thrown a rock at it, but, I didn't. I was so shocked. And so I guess we were both actually in shock, and it passed directly over our heads and kept on going in a west-northwesterly direction, roughly toward what we know as Area 51 out here, just over the mountain range from me. But there's no question about what it was. There's also no question about what it is not. Now, we were not the only ones to have seen it in the valley this night. Many people in the valley saw it and reported it, and the newspaper out here made a call to Nellis Air Force Base. And, in fact, I didn't even report it to the newspaper. This was in the next week's paper, that Nellis had been called because so many people had seen this. And Nellis responded with something like, and I'm paraphrasing, yes, it was possible that a secret mission overflew the Pahrump Valley on that date or that evening, but that it was a C-130 aircraft. That's right, a C-130 aircraft. And I tell you, folks, I was in the Air Force, and I rode in C-130s, and they're really big prop pitch airplanes, and They make a lot of noise and would have rattled my teeth. And I can absolutely assure you what I looked up and saw, what Ramona looked up and saw, was a large, black, metallic looking, you know what? I should retract that. Large, black. I can't say metallic looking. You just sort of think metal because that's generally what aircraft are made out of, right? But it was large, black, silent, and either defying gravity or floating. That's what we saw. I made all the reports you're supposed
In this program, I want to get
these, and I was embarrassed for the Air Force in coming up with that explanation for what had been a C-130. And then I thought very hard about it before I went on the air, because I talk about this kind of thing. That's what this program is all about, the unusual. Well, this was really unusual. And I thought very hard about it. Should I even report that I've seen something like this, even though I had my wife with me? Because doing this kind of a program, people are going to go, oh, come on. Sorry, that's what I saw. And ultimately, I decided I should tell the truth and tell what I saw. And that's how we're going to start out the conversation, talking about these for real, and they are for real. I can't say that about a lot of things I talk about on the air because I don't know it to be true. But, Colm, I know what I saw, and it was a large black truck to me, Colm, that if I'd had senses of me about me, I could have thrown a rock at the thing, just about.
Yeah, that sounds like a really spectacular sighting. And what year was that, by the way?
I knew. I knew you'd ask that. I don't remember. It could have been
10 years ago?
You know, about, Ramona will rush in eventually and tell me probably, but yeah, in that range, right.
Because we got interested in the black triangle phenomenon, and your case sounds almost identical to the standard issue description that we've got for, I think we're running up towards 500 separate sightings of these objects all around the United States. But what really began the black triangle phenomenon from our perspective was the famous Illinois, St. Louis, Missouri sightings that happened January 2000. And that was the early morning of January 5th. We got a call from a police officer in Highland, Illinois, who was reporting this, exactly what you've described, this gigantic silent triangle that had just gone over. And it was heading in a southwesterly direction from Highland to Lebanon, and then it actually passed over the outer perimeter of Scott Air Force Base, which is one of the larger Air Force bases in the area. It's heading in a southwesterly direction, as you mentioned, about 30 miles an hour, making no attempt to be stealthy, and it had a lot of bright lights on it too. And the interesting thing about this was the cop who had called it in also radioed on ahead to the next precinct and told them, get outside and wait for this thing. You're going to see a light show in a minute. And that's exactly what they did. Police officers in 4 separate precincts on that same morning saw the same object heading in a southwesterly direction, no more than 200 or 300 feet above the ground, and completely silent. This thing was emitting very, very strong lights, and it was a rough triangular wedge-shaped thing about the size of a football field.
Mm-hmm. Well, when I saw on the website tonight, I saw the NIDS photograph. I just couldn't resist putting up my own. Following our sighting, we had quite a long discussion with an artist in order to provide an absolutely, or as close to absolutely accurate a picture right down to the geography and the mountains in the background and the whole schmear as we could. And so what you see there really is exactly, precisely what we saw. And I guess I, like everybody else, I want to know what we're dealing with here. What is it NIDS believes we're dealing with here?
Well, we've gone through a really sort of lengthy evolution in our thinking, because when we first started gathering all of these cases, they were very much pretty well all the same standard explanations. You have, I think, really well encapsulated exactly what the majority of the eyewitnesses have been telling us from all around the country. So these things are, they're certainly not rare. We have up to almost 500 cases now.
And how long have you been getting the reports?
Well, the actual sightings go back to the 1980s, but as we sort of ramped up our information gathering, the vast majority of the sightings that we have in our database begin at 1998 and then just continue. There's a dramatic increase, 1998 to 1999, then 2000, 2001. It's really interesting. There was almost 250 cases leading up to September 2001. And then there was a dramatic fall off all through 2002. 2003, they began to increase again, and 2004 again. But there was a dramatic decrease, and I can only speak for our database. I'm not sure if that is, other organizations are collecting these kinds of data too. So, but we noticed a dramatic decrease in 2002.
All right. Somebody just named Kay in Los Angeles writes, you and your guest tonight should be aware that while triangle-type ships are being reported more these days, there are sighting reports of these kinds of ships going back actually several centuries. The famous researcher Desmond Leslie lists a few dozen historical accounts, including these black triangle ships, in the book Flying Saucers Have Landed, which you no doubt own. I don't have the book in front of me, but I believe the sighting dates back to the 15th century, so that, to me, makes it rather dubious that they could be our military smile devices. So,
yeah, that's a very good point, because if we have cases going back to the 1960s, and we've done a lot of backtracking since about 2 years ago, when we had about 200 cases or so. We published what we thought was a correlation in terms of the Air Force military bases around the country, and an apparent concentration of these black triangle sightings in the vicinity of those bases, and also in the flight paths between these bases. I'm specifically talking about Air Force Materiel Command and Air Mobility Command Air Force bases. Now, about 2 or 3 months ago, we launched an updated review of the data with an awful lot more, a couple hundred more cases.
Does NIDS believe, it says on the website here, that the hypothesis that I guess you have or holding on to is that these BBDs could be lighter than air blimp-like military vehicles of some kind, BBDs standing for what, big black deltas?
Yeah, big black deltas. That is the hypothesis we floated a couple of years ago, yes. Now, I should mention, since then, we have had re-examination of the data.
Oh.
And I can certainly say that the data that we have right now, if you plot it on a map of the United States, and not only you plot the Air Force Materiel Command, Air Mobility Command bases, but you plot, standard cities, highways, you name it, on the map of the United States, what you see is something really interesting. There is a much stronger correlation between the big black triangles and the main interstate highways in the United States, as well as the cities. And that really causes us to take a second look at the hypothesis of a military stealth project, because the locations of the vast majority of the new sightings that we have are located, as I mentioned, on interstate highways, which is completely inconsistent with a stealth project. In other words, if you take on the West Coast Interstate 5,
yes,
and you begin in Vancouver, Canada, you go all the way through Seattle, and you move down to Portland, and then through Eugene, these triangular objects follow that main highway all the way down to L.A. And you know, south of L.A. they go down to San Diego. There is an unmistakable association with, number one, the interstate highways, and number two, the main population centers. So we're looking at objects that are adhering to main population. I mean, most of the population travels on the interstate highways as opposed to the smaller highways. So we are revising our hypothesis.
Okay, that's very interesting. Colm, is there any reason, any motivation that you can even dream about that would cause the military to want to have their top secret aircraft seen by a lot of people?
It is completely inconsistent with what happened with the B-2 bomber when it was still not talked about and unacknowledged. Same thing with the F-117, the F-117 fighter bomber. None of these craft were flown down highways. Now, again, these objects are not flying across the highways. They're actually flying down the highways.
Gotcha.
So, in other words, it's almost like they're following the highways. And Interstate 5 is not the only example that we have. If you look at the map, in Colorado, you've got I-25 that runs north-south through the entire state, starting off at Cheyenne in Wyoming, going all the way through Fort Collins, all the way down through Denver, down to Pueblo. You've got them dotted along that same highway.
How many reports do you have that caused you to realize that that's where, you know, the majority of the sightings were occurring along interstates? Do you have a large proportion? I mean, when did it jolt you?
Well, it jolted us when we added the newest data to our to the map, and then we flipped it from the Air Force bases, because what we were doing was plotting the Air Force bases on the map of the United States and plotting the locations of the Black Triangle sightings, and up to about 200, 250, there seemed to be a correlation. However, with the newest groupings, and I should mention also, we've asked Larry Hatch, who was probably one of the biggest private UFO databases in the world, for his data set, and also we've asked MUFON for their data set, and we've also plotted them on the same kinds of maps. So we have 3 separate databases, and they are looking very, very similar.
Well, if you conclude that these are not our own craft, and you do so on the basis of the seeming public exposure they want to have, then there aren't many other choices, are there?
There are not many other choices, but I also believe that there is a stealth craft that is being flown in and out of various locations, and it is a very large triangular object. I say that for several reasons. Number one, we have reports of these objects being seen on the ground from Tikaboo Peak, on the ground at Groom Lake. That's number one. Number two, we have reports of one of these objects on approach into Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Dayton, Ohio.
Colm, I would sure like to know, when did the report of the triangular craft at Groom Lake, that's Area 51, folks, when did you get that?
97, I believe.
97.
I'll have to check it, but 97, and the eyewitness was able to triangulate how big this thing was because the landing lights, how many landing lights it blotted out.
The one we saw had landing lights. In fact, folks, if you go, we're going to take a break here, Colm. If you go to the website, coasttocoastam.com, you'll see the NIDS photograph up there, and you'll see the artist rendition very, very carefully put together in every respect of exactly what Ramona and myself saw, and how you can actually see how big it appeared to our eyes from where we were. This thing was a monster, and I guarantee you, folks, we really saw it. From the high desert, in the night, This is Coast to Coast AM. When you've seen something like this, it sort of changes your view of everything because, I don't know, because you've had personal exposure to it. Now, Ramona was just in here reminding me that a program we were doing at the time in Las Vegas called Area 2000, a program about the unusual, to some degree funded by Robert Bigelow. We were actually doing that program when this incident occurred, so that may roughly date it. Whenever it was that Area 2000 was going on, that's when it happened. Robert Bigelow is a very, very wealthy man who lives in Las Vegas, Nevada, who quietly funds, a great deal more than you know about. You know about some of it, NIDS, for example, and a lot of other scientific inquiry, some of which is made public and a lot of which obviously is not made public for various sound reasons. But Robert, Area 2000, all those years ago, and that's when it happened, and that would date it a little bit. Do you remember offhand when that was?
I don't have a date for that, but my guess would be close to 10 years ago.
Yeah, so I think this incident occurred about a decade
94.
ago. I really think it's pretty much accurate. So,
yeah.
And anyway, so then you're contending that you believe some are legitimate, military experimental craft and others not. Is that bottom line?
Yes, I think there's both. I think there is an unacknowledged aircraft because, as I mentioned, on the tarmac at Groom Lake is pretty in your face.
Yes.
And also on the approach to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. Now, Wright-Patterson Air Force Base is one of the two headquarters of these Air Mobility Command and Air Force Mobility Command or Air Force Material Command, Scott Air Force Base being the second one. I was interested that you mentioned the Nellis Air Force Base had said, there was a C-130 in the air, because
right.
That was exactly what the investigators we sent out to the Illinois sighting in January 2000. That's exactly what they were told from Scott Air Force Base.
Oh, you've got to be kidding.
Yeah, we had a C-130 in the air at the time. I mean, this thing, according to five separate police officers, would dwarf a C-130 and completely the wrong shape.
Not even close. Not even. I was
not even close.
Actually, you know what? I was embarrassed for Nellis. If Nellis had said, we had a secret mission which may have overflown the Pahrump Valley, and that's all they had said, I'd have gone, oh, okay. But I mean, to go on and say it was a C-130, I actually got kind of embarrassed for them and angry at the same time. It was like, that's embarrassing.
It is kind of insulting. We had one of the investigators we sent out to Illinois was a retired member of Air Force Office of Special Investigations. And he actually gained entrance to Scott Air Force Base and was sitting in the commander's office, commander of AFOSI on Scott Air Force Base.
Yes.
And basically that's what they were told. They knew nothing of any unusual aircraft, but there was a C-130 in the air at the time. And we know from what the police officers told us that this object went right over the perimeter of Scott Air Force Base.
Huh.
And we're not talking several thousand feet. We're talking, less than 1,000 feet.
Well, any unidentified flying object actually having the temerity to go over a U.S. Air Force base, you would think it would be dealt with rather quickly, considering there's radar and they would be aware by eyewitnesses, if no other way, that, gee whiz, there's this thing overflying our Air Force Base. Do we want to go up and see what it is? And if we don't, why don't we?
Yeah, that's exactly right. Now, your caller, your listener mentioned that they go back to, or she thinks they go back to the 1500s. Well, we know that there have been several waves of high intensity, either a triangle or a boomerang aircraft or UFOs, whatever you want to call them, going all the way back to 1980. In especially the Hudson Valley Westchester boomerang was a very famous series of sightings out in Connecticut and Putnam County, New York, around 1980 to 1985. And we're talking literally thousands of eyewitnesses over that 5-year period. And again, a lot of the eyewitnesses reported that these things were literally floating down the, I believe it's I-84 out there, just floating down the interstate, maybe 300 or 400 feet. Sometimes just after dark, when it was still rush hour, and people were stopping their cars, pulling over to the side, getting out, and the photo or the artist's rendition on your website that I just pulled up is the kind of description that a lot of these people were describing. So multiple waves we would say are the waves that we have monitored really began in 1998, and it's.
I know that NIDS, of course, deals with good, hard science and tries to stay objective and brings in really world-class investigators and all the rest of that. But, there must be times when you folks sit down and discuss some of the questions that my audience would be asking and I'm asking, and that is, if we are being visited, Colm, and we're going to talk about cattle mutilations and all the rest of this sort of thing, but if we are being visited, why have they not announced themselves? Why toy with us in such a seemingly childish manner, zooming down freeways, picking up and dismembering cows and dropping them off, and, perhaps creating crop circles and doing all these things that we cannot explain? It's almost like we're being played with, toyed with in some manner. Do you ever sit down and talk about that at NIDS?
Well, we had a discussion actually a couple of weekends ago. We had a lot of the board members were in town, the NIDS Science Advisory Board members, and there was a lot of talk about this so-called leaky embargo hypothesis, which is, the idea that there is a generalized embargo for galactic, if you want to call it galactic civilizations, and that one way of beginning the process of contact is the so-called leaky embargo, which is a very sort of surreptitious program to gradually let the citizens know that there's something beyond, Earth.
Let's take that for a moment. Do you think such a program of slow leak could work so that eventually 5 or 10 years or whatever the plan would call for, when contact actually was made, the American people would be perhaps mildly surprised, but would go, well, finally, or, some lesser reaction than panic in what Brookings imagined might occur with contact?
Well, I think there's really two parts to that, and the American people in opinion polls have really voiced their opinion time and time again that they would not feel particularly threatened by this kind of thing. We have run several nationwide polls run by the Roper organization, and the kind of feedback that we've got is that most people would not panic. They would not sort of head for the hills and sort of buy lots of guns. They would carry on and be very cautious. However, the other part of that whole thing is how would the scientific community react, and how would the political and other community react? Religious to an extent too.
Sure.
The so-called upper echelons of society. Scientists really have a lot more to lose in this whole game than most other people, because there is a potential of the scientific viewpoint being changed fairly rapidly by the sudden appearance of of aircraft that defy the laws of physics, for example.
Yes, there would be a great upset, to be sure. But again, my question was, just imagine that such a scenario is actually underway. Do you think it would be successful? Do you think that the Roper surveys that Robert commissioned are sort of an absolute indication that it is working? This slow leak approach?
It's really difficult to verify that, because you have the ridicule factor, which permeates society, which permeates especially the elite parts of society. So it's a really open question whether or not the political apparatus in this country is any more open to the whole concept than it was 30 or 40 years ago. And if you're hypothesizing a leaky embargo, this leaky embargo sort of gradual appearance scenario has been operating at full tilt since 1947, which is almost 60 years now.
Right. Or how about this? That this sort of I don't know spot information that gets laughed at, and eyewitness reports that get laughed at, and all the rest of it, or even stuff that makes people sort of mildly curious, like video that's been captured and the rest of that, which is more impressive yet. All of this is actually sort of a military disinformation program, and that people like myself doing programs on this kind of thing are perhaps dupes of the military, and we're just helping them continue to see to it that their secret military projects are laughed at.
That could well be true. That is superimposed on a long-term program of gradual introduction. This program could be a 200-year program. There really is no way of assessing that, because there's nothing to compare it against. But what you've just said about mixing information with disinformation, I think, is a very classic way of operating. The other aspect of this this whole business is what Jacques Vallée would call the sort of deliberate introduction of absurdity into this equation, and that is, there are so many cases of UFOs doing very, very strange things, or occupants of UFOs being reported to sort of do completely weird things, like offering people cakes or offering them food. And there's several cases in France that happened in the 1950s, 1960s where that was documented.
Sounds like a housewarming present.
Yeah, exactly. Where there's really no logic to what happens. So Jacques Vallée would say that is part of a long-term potential, long-term program where the absurdity is used as a learning tool. Where people are exposed to absurd things, there's confusion, it's a way of psychologically insisting on learning, so to speak.
Well, how about this? Any ideas on, if this were a military craft, what its function might be? I mean, yes, it moves silently, but it was ever so visible. In fact, it blotted out the sky, and it was so low and so slow that, you wouldn't need a golden BB to bring one of those down. What military application might there be?
Well, it's strange. Just before the show, I got an email from this guy at an aerospace company, and what he said was, I've heard that these are triangular-shaped dirigibles that the Army, I think, in brackets, are flying around. They are antenna arrays that are in violation of some treaty, so they're keeping them quiet. And then this especially makes sense, seeing that Lockheed Martin now owns Goodyear Aerospace. In other words, we're talking about a very large blimp with extremely sophisticated antenna arrays, something that could be parked at 100,000 feet and essentially monitor everything. So you could park it over Afghanistan, you could park it over Iraq, and you would own every signal that's coming in and out of that area.
Oh, I hadn't thought of an application of that sort. That's absolutely fascinating. You're right. We have satellites, but to be virtually stationary at, say, 100,000 feet, you would indeed own every transmission made by anything over a very wide geographic area. That's...
Yeah, and we've had people come forward before to NIDS and say, you know, these things are designed to stay up there for weeks. You know, it's kind of like the equivalent of a submarine. You know, you go down under the water for weeks at a time. These things come in and out of, for example, Area 51, but they stay up in where they're parked for weeks at a time, and they monitor.
Colm, here's the other thing, the other question about all this, and that is if the military has something like this, and if, I don't know, aliens, I guess, are also manifesting something like this in our sky, I just, well, where am I going with this? I want so to know what this is about. I want to know what we're facing, and if they're both up there, it confuses the issue all the more. And
Absolutely.
I want to get, so badly, I want to get to the bottom of all this while I'm still alive. I want to know what's going on. Will we know what's going on while we're still alive, Colm?
Well, you know, if you look at this whole leaky embargo thing and you take it seriously, this could go on ad infinitum. Time could be, our lifetimes could be fairly small in terms of the kinds of length of time that this program could go on with. But, you know, one of the things that we've been looking at is, since we discovered this relationship with the interstate highways in the United States, we know that the Europeans were absolutely inundated with these black triangles, especially Belgium, in 1989 to 1990.
I remember.
And they went as far as launching F-16 fighters in response to these things, because their ground radar picked them up on several occasions. And there is a really interesting map of Belgium where all of the sightings, or many of the sightings, are plotted on that same map, and you can see exactly the same as in the United States. They conform to the main highways in the country. Between Liège and Huey, and also Verviers and Liège, there's dozens and dozens of sightings that lie along the main highways. So, you know, something as crude and ridiculous as navigation by using these large highways may not be out of the question. It may almost be sort of either a display. You know, that they're,
you know, I might buy off on display, but I don't know about navigation. If they've got to use our interstate signs to get from point A to point B in a triangle-defying gravity, then I just don't buy that. Hold on, Colm. We'll be right back. Enigmatic and frustrating, very frustrating. Oh, man is doing this kind of work and this kind of program frustrating. This kind of material, black triangles. Animals being mutilated and laid back down. Crop circles, some of which, of course, we know were fake, but a lot of which were not. I mean, things going on Earth that clearly point toward the possibility of our having visitors, and it is so frustrating not to know exactly what it is. I just can't tell you. You know, I think I should add that NIDS has top-level PhD scientists on staff, and in the right circumstance, they will dispatch these people to any point really in the world and investigate unusual phenomena of all sorts, whether it's cattle mutilations or sightings that rise to a certain level, or whatever. They really can. They have the resources, the money to do all of this, and they are almost, I suppose, unique in that regard. And they have a hotline set up. At least you used to have. It's been a while since you've been on the show, Colm. Do you still have the hotline?
We do have a hotline, but it's not operated tonight. But anytime during the next week, starting Monday, people could call 702-798-1700. We do not have people manning the phones tonight.
I got you. Area code 702-798-1700, right?
Yes.
All right. Now, what sorts of things, Colm, typically rise to the level where you would dispatch somebody on scene?
We would really like to prioritize multiple witness sightings. That is more than obviously 2 or 3, 4 people, if possible. If there's any level or suggestion of physical evidence, that would help enormously. In other words, sometimes these objects interact with the vegetation. Sometimes things drop off these objects. Anything to do with physical evidence will get our interest big time. But I have to say, over 90% of the cases that come into us are lights in the sky, essentially.
Yeah. I can see, just by giving out the number, folks, please don't call right now. I can hear the phone lines at NIDS ringing in the background, and inevitably that occurs when you give out a phone number. This is now a Monday through Friday operation, I take it.
Yeah, normally I would have had people manning the phones, but not tonight.
Yeah, okay, fine. Please wait until Monday. At any rate, so multiple witness sightings. When there's a cattle mutilations, for example, a serious case of cattle mutilations, would that cause your organization to move some scientists toward a farmer's field somewhere?
Yes, and it has in the past. Probably the fastest we've ever responded was a case of cattle mutilation that happened up on the ranch property up in northeastern Utah. We had 3 people up there within 7 hours of the call, which is not bad actually in terms of reaction time.
Not bad at all. As I mentioned, a lot of water has gone onto the bridge since we last talked. So what has been the state of ufology since we last talked?
Well, the state of ufology has really focused on the black triangles in the last couple of years. But we have got a tremendous variety of reports coming in, and one of the things that we've noticed is in any of the have to do with physical evidence, we have tended to obviously focus on those, and every time that we've applied scientific analysis to physical evidence, it has come out with a mundane explanation.
Peter Davenport also runs a sighting center in the state of Washington, and in evidence, he records eyewitness reports, plays them back, does that sort of thing, and he literally reports everything of substance. Now, that's not necessarily the case with NIDS, is it? In other words, and there's been some criticism on that about that, Colm, because occasionally NIDS will get in the middle of a scientific investigation of some sort or another and find reason to not release all details or everything about it right away. So you're an investigative organization, and you don't always report everything to the American public, do you?
Well, we are an investigative organization. We're not a reporting center.
Right.
So, I mean, there's a fundamental difference between being a reporting center and an investigative. If we maintained at a very early stage that it was necessary to have sufficient scientific evidence before publishing. And many cases that we get, I would say the vast majority of cases, do not. Yes, I'm aware that we've been accused of hiding data and that kind of thing. But if we get any investigative results that meet the criterion of being substantiated in any way, we do publish them on our website.
Okay.
And we have always done that, but very few cases out of that number rise to that level. Otherwise, being a reporting agency is a completely different function from being an investigative agency.
Certainly it is.
Especially using the scientific method. We have a science advisory board that does hold our feet to the fire in terms of the kinds of stuff that is published.
So NIDS is on a straight line, continuing to do as it always has done, or have there been changes in policy and direction for the organization of recent days?
Well, we've had a new staff member come on in the last couple of months. Dr. Bruce Cornett is now the deputy administrator of NIDS. In terms of the kinds of cases we deal with, we have narrowed the focus to pretty well the cases I just mentioned, multiple witness sightings, close encounters, anything to do with physical evidence that are the vast majority of the cases that we try to focus on. Now, the black triangles obviously are not in that category, but we do continue to collect those kinds of data. But we do not spend much time or effort on, lights in the sky, essentially.
Well, again, triangles in the sky, theirs and ours. Colm, I'm forced to ask you, does NIDS believe that the military has had contact with aliens?
Contact with aliens?
Contact with aliens, yes.
We have had information over the last several years that seems to indicate that certainly pieces of technology have been recovered. Now, I don't think that actually meets the question that you just asked.
It gets close, but in other words, we may have recovered craft or technology that we have back engineered. I mean, if we have ours and theirs in the sky, and there's any relationship, then it's an obvious question. Either they gave us technology, either their technology crashed, we back engineered it, or one of the above.
Well, a lot of the lines of evidence that we've had, and we're really talking about whispered conversations kind of thing, seems to suggest that there is technology has been recovered. But there definitely is not a smoking gun from that perspective.
Do you recall the testimony given by a colonel once who said that he actually was releasing technology into U.S. industry that had been recovered from Roswell, from the crash? This
was Colonel Corso?
Of course.
Yes.
How did you digest that information? How did you feel about that? I had 3 opportunities to interview him. He was very compelling.
Yes, and we spent a lot of time interviewing him too, kind of off the record. And I think there's a really big difference between the kinds of data and information that he was talking about when he was on one-on-one interviews versus what actually ended up in the book that he wrote the day after Roswell. I think there's a lot of stuff in that book that is very difficult to stand behind.
Okay.
There were a number of different things that he talked about during the interviews with NIDS people. Among them, an encounter with some kind of a being at White Sands Missile Base that did ring true from the eyewitness perspective. In other words, we could not find any reason to disbelieve him. He also did talk about working with this General Trudeau and having some kind of a program ongoing. People at NIDS went into the military and tried to falsify that, and were not able to falsify it. In other words, those reports of technology being back engineered via industry.
Do you mean falsify or verify?
Falsify.
Falsify.
In other words, it reached a stage where we can't confirm or deny.
I see. All right.
So we were not able to falsify that.
Okay. Do you believe that Area 51, since you're near it, Colm, remains active with the kind of thing that we certainly know was going on years ago? Do you think it remains a center for the testing of the black technologies we have?
That's a good question. The only information we have is that the same numbers of aircraft seem to be going in and out of the facility. I don't know if the focus has shifted into a new direction or if new centers around the country have opened up. But we have no idea. Traditionally we have kind of stayed away from spending a lot of time on Area 51 because the vast majority of the stuff that comes out of Area 51 is not really in the bailiwick of NIDS. In other words,
Right.
It's not unidentified.
Sure.
So we have tended to stay away, with the exceptions of these large triangular objects that are associated with.
Well, except, of course, that you've got to bear in mind there's a lot of cross-pollination. In other words, a lot of things that are perhaps dispatched from Area 51 are seen and reported to you as possible alien craft.
Sure.
So, there's going to be that cross-pollination.
Sure.
Inevitably, and you would think, obviously, they're not going to publish a flight schedule for you.
Yeah, that's right.
But yes, I'm sure a lot of that is reported. And so, I don't know. We're all curious.
We suspect that there's a lot of UAV testing going on out there, for example, and that is that's one of the things that we've kept an eye on is the kinds of UFO reports that we've been getting, matching them against the UAV databases.
UAV standing for
unmanned aerial vehicles.
Uh-huh.
In other words, the kinds of the Predator and the Globehawk. There are dozens and dozens of different sizes, different shapes of these unmanned aerial vehicles flying around now and being tested and being deployed. Some of them have very unusual looking shapes.
Indeed, yes.
And we've had several cases where people have reported to us very, very small, sort of 6-inch to a foot type objects that are obviously intelligently controlled, and they fly in very, very unusual ways. Are they UFOs or are they UAVs? That's a question that we look at.
Of the various stories of contact over the years that have manifested, Colm, and when I say contact, I mean people who claim to have been taken aboard craft, people who claim to have had close encounters of the third type at least. Are there any that NIDS particularly regards as credible?
Are you talking about abductions then?
Yes, I am.
Well, there was a case we dealt with fairly recently where we thought there was physical evidence, and I don't want to go into too much detail, but and there's actually a second one too that falls into the same category, where physical evidence in association with abductions is considered a holy grail, so to speak.
How much detail can you give me? Can you get somewhat generic and give me an idea of what we're talking about?
Well, I can go through the case pretty well because This was an entire family out in California who had multiple encounters in their home over several year period, and they were obviously very stressed because all family members except one actually were having these encounters with creatures in their home. So they began to formulate a plan to actually begin to try to measure or to get physical evidence. And one of those efforts involved putting a towel down on the floor, and underneath that towel was an aluminum foil. The idea was to get footprints.
Of course.
And sure enough,
they did.
They did get footprints. After a particularly intense series of encounters, they found this object embedded in the towel that was, it looked like a claw, a small claw. And this was physical evidence that was directly in association with a bunch of anomalous encounters. And we're talking dozens and dozens of encounters in different houses because this family moved a couple of times because of the high stress levels.
I can imagine. All right, what did the claw turn out to be?
Well, that was the interesting thing. We went to the wall on this case because we thought it was, sufficiently interesting. We put it through multiple rounds of DNA analysis, and I'm talking 7 or 8 separate rounds of DNA analysis. First several analysis came up with something that looked or did not match anything in the databases that we knew about. Eventually, and there was some very, very talented people who worked on this project. Eventually, what they did was they went back to square one and used a completely different form of analysis. And eventually they nailed what this object was. It was a terrestrial, mundane mollusk, or it was a dried-up snail that was embedded in the towel. And the reason it took about 9 months to do this project. The reason it was so difficult was that snails tend to secrete a thick mucus that is loaded with chemicals that stop the normal DNA analysis procedure.
I see.
And so we were getting results from several different types of analysis, several different types of directions that seemed to suggest that this did not match with any DNA that was known. So naturally, we were getting really interested. We were getting more and more interested as time was going on, and we spent a lot of money. We spent a lot of time on this. But the long and the short of this whole thing was that even though the explanation itself was fairly mundane,
yes,
that does not necessarily detract from the experiences of this family.
Well, not at all. But it grabs and just shakes it grabs right out of your hand a piece of solid evidence that you thought was connected to it. That's got to be incredibly frustrating.
That was very frustrating. We've had several cases like that where apparently physical evidence in association with one of these, what looks like a very interesting case, it just turns out to be mundane. The physical evidence itself turns out to be mundane.
Okay, Colm, hold on. We're at a break point, and we'll be right back. This is Coast to Coast AM. It's very, very frustrating. Colm, I'm curious about something. SETI, the organization looking for intelligent life up near the hydrogen frequency, or now with laser or whatever, they've been at it for a number of years, and a statement's been made recently that, if we don't come up with something, despite what we've surveyed already, and say another, I don't know, X number of years, we're going to be forced to make a statement that says, basically, look, we've surveyed this much of the sky, and we haven't found anything, and we've got to admit that's a possibility that there is nothing. Is there going to get to be that point with NIDS where, despite the best efforts and years and lots of dollars expended, you're going to be forced to say, we don't have the smoking gun? after all these years and all this investigation, we don't have the smoking gun. So maybe all of this comes from imaginations, overactive imaginations. Maybe all these reports of abductions and sightings are just, well, whatever they are, but not real. Is there going to come that point?
Well, I think that physical evidence is the only way to go, because I mean that's what we're set up to do. That's why NIS was created, was to go after the physical evidence. Once you abandon that and you start, invoking other dimensions and what have we, it becomes an endless circle. So we're going to continue for as long as it takes. But your question's a very good one. We have not got any physical evidence right now that we would regard as a smoking gun. And that physical evidence is materials analysis or DNA analysis like the one that I briefly described. But we've done multiple physical elemental analysis on everything from implants or alleged implants to objects that are, associated with abductions. And like I mentioned, every single one of those has come down with a mundane explanation. Now, you could certainly hypothesize that maybe we're missing something. Maybe that, this is advanced nanotechnology that is made to look like, ordinary pieces of aluminum. But, we're using what we consider the best available technology, and if there was any hint of anything from quote-unquote extraterrestrial sources, the obvious way to look at it would be to look at isotope ratios, and every single examination that we've done on everything from pieces of objects that have come out of people's sinus cavities,
yes,
or objects that have come out of other extremities, they all said the same thing. They're all terrestrial. They're all in many cases they have a mundane explanation. We had a very, very high quality interview with a family. It was a mother, daughter, and another child who wasn't there. Had a very intense abduction experience just outside San Francisco. They came to our office here at NIDS, and we spent almost a day carefully interviewing several people involved. And there is no doubt in our minds that these people absolutely believed that outside San Francisco one night that this large object came right over their car. They pulled over their car, and both the mother and the daughter remembered that the husband was left in the car while the mother and daughter were floated up into this object. And after that event, the mother began to feel discomfort up in her sinus cavities. And make a long story short, one morning she was shaking her head because it was particularly uncomfortable, and something
popped out,
and she noticed it in the wash basin. So she brought it along to us, and
here we go again.
We conducted X-ray analysis on this object, and it turned out that it was nickel-plated brass. It was a small rectangular object. Well, it turned out once the people who looked into it pretty closely found that it was one of these little metal brass objects that holds toothbrush bristles in place. Now, whatever happened on that morning when the thing suddenly appeared in the wash basin, after she had shook her head and felt like something had dropped out of her nose, that does not, again, take away from the very compelling testimony that both the mother and the daughter separately told to us.
I understand, but it's like the snail.
Yeah, exactly the same.
It's just like the snail, and short of any Physical evidence. I mean, does that mean that one day NIDS is going to have to say, well, look, we've been on the hunt now for 20 years with the best people that money can buy, and we've got to say there's no physical evidence. We've got to make this statement.
Well, we can also, we can probably, we'll be pretty comfortable making that statement. But as these cases accumulate, and there are several others. There was a case where a pretty spectacular UFO sighting just outside Grand Junction, Colorado, a few years ago, where this object dropped off a UFO, and we put it through probably close to a dozen sets of pretty sophisticated elemental analysis.
Now, wait a minute. This object dropped off a UFO. Could you clarify that a little? What do you mean?
Well, according to two eyewitnesses who were in a car, they saw they had a relatively close encounter with this craft, and as it was leaving, they noticed something dropping
from it
onto the road.
I see.
And so they picked it up. It was a fairly sizable object, but elemental analysis and a whole variety of different types of analysis showed that it was basically a form of slag, aluminum slag. It had nothing, and we went after the possibility that it would have different isotope ratios and all of that, and it didn't turn out to be the case. So we had that case. One of our board members is currently investigating yet another case, at this time in Belgium, where this couple had a close encounter with an object or with a craft, and again something dropped off the object and landed on the road beside them. It was molten when it landed, so they had to wait for it to cool down.
Really?
Brought it to the board member, who then put it through a series of lab tests, and it turned out to be pyrite.
Pyrite?
Fool's gold. So, you've got this, what I'm trying to say is you've got this pattern of anomalies, and with these patterns of anomalies, there's physical evidence. But when you apply the scientific, rigorous methodology to these objects, in 100% of cases, in our experience, and I can only speak for NID's experience, it comes out with a terrestrial/mundane explanation. Now, if you go back to the original talk about the leaky embargo hypothesis, maybe that's exactly what this is telling us.
Maybe.
That
maybe. Yeah, maybe.
We are, for whatever reason, not being allowed, or whatever word you want to use, to obtain physical evidence of these, because maybe it's too early. So your question about 10 years, 20 years, 30 years for NIDS is a good one, but maybe we're not at that stage yet.
Well,
I mean, that's a pure speculation.
Sure. What about those things that were witnessed and recorded, I think very accurately, that did occur at the ranch? Now, the ranch, folks, is a ranch where very anomalous things began to happen. And in some way, NIDS and Robert Bigelow found out about it and literally bought this ranch at the location we won't disclose, and then set up scientific observation posts, if you will, to watch the anomalous activity. And on a couple of previous shows, you've reported some of that, some incredible stuff that occurred that has totally no explanation in logic, does it?
The logic part certainly escapes us. We have logged close to 100 separate incidents on that property going back to about 1994. So we're approaching 10-year anniversary. We actually moved on to that property in July, August '96, which is almost 8 years ago. And since then, we've been monitoring that property. We've had people on the property pretty well continuously, we still have people on the property, and there are
Oh.
still the occasional incidents that happen, but nothing like the intensity that happened back in 94 to 97.
But it
98.
was a lot of intensity. There was a great deal of intensity
Yes,
there.
there was a great deal.
And a lot of it was documented with cameras, either in the absence of what could be seen, the impossibility of it, or whatever. In other words, actual documentation existed of for quite a bit of it, and that
Yeah,
demands explanation.
Well, one good example of what you're talking about, it was in 1998. We had a set of six cameras, surveillance cameras that were running, and there were two telephone poles separated by about 300, well, probably like 200 yards, and three of the cameras instantaneously lost power at about 8:31 summer night in 1998, and one camera on the second pole was looking at the three cameras that lost power. So, to make a long story short, it turned out that the wiring had been forcibly ripped out of all three cameras, and it would take a lot of strength to do that.
But these cameras were connected to video recorders, right?
Correct.
So you had cameras virtually watching cameras.
Yes.
And this physical destruction occurred while the cameras were watching.
Yes, and it was still the end of the afternoon, evening, where there was still enough light for the camera that was watching the three cameras to have enough resolution to see somebody coming up to the place and ripping off the wires from the cameras. Now, at the same time, there was a PVC piping where the video wires led into the ground that was also forcibly ripped off the telephone pole. So there was a lot of force used in this particular operation.
Yes, and during
destroy
that
those cameras.
entire time when that happened, there was a camera watching, which in review of the whole time saw nothing.
Absolutely nothing. And you know, we went through the process of video enhancement and digital enhancement to make sure that we were missing nothing. You know, we even had enough resolution on the camera that was watching the three cameras that were disabled that we could actually see the lights, the characteristic red lights underneath these cameras going off.
Right.
And it corresponded exactly to the timestamp on the cameras that lost power. So, you know, we were able to triangulate the sequence of events pretty accurately. The only thing that was wrong with this whole thing was that there was nothing associated with the cameras losing power. There was not enough resolution to see the actual wires coming out of the cameras, but we could see the cameras losing power because those red lights on the underneath of the cameras were exactly corresponding to.
But there would be no way that a person who's doing this damage could have gone not seen.
Absolutely no way. These telephone poles were located on open ground, so it was not like they were in the middle of trees or anything where people could hide. There was no way for a person even crawling along the ground where they could not have been seen. It was just not a feasible operation, and we know that the cameras lost power at that time because of the timestamps.
So something that was invisible did this.
Correct. Well, something that was not picked up by the cameras.
Right. Okay, so this stuff then is going on, despite the fact that we can't get physical proof of it going on, whatever it is, and that would almost automatically, it seems to me, force NIDS to look at the possibility that it's not extraterrestrial, perhaps, in origin, but as at least one possibility that the phenomena is associated with, you know, I hate to go into other dimensions here, but you're almost forced into doing it, Colm. Almost forced into that, at least considering it, aren't you?
Well, we're forced to consider that every single analysis, physical analysis that we've done has come up with something terrestrial. And
Right.
In each case, those physical objects have been associated with anomalies. So if there is a terrestrial explanation to these phenomena, then yes, you would invoke some kind of a dimensional hypothesis. And it goes back to this: what is the definition of an extraterrestrial? Does it also include dimensions or entities or beings or whatever you want to call them that are coexisting on this planet, but we just can't see them? We've had several incidences on this same property in northeastern Utah.
One of them, it seems to me, involved somebody with night vision equipment watching what amounted to a hole in nighttime space opening up with something crawling through it.
Right.
That is correct, isn't it?
That is correct, and that happened in August of 1997. Two very experienced investigators were on this ridge that overlooked the property. They were up there specifically to monitor an area where those stuff had been happening in the previous weeks. So they were there with a purpose, and they had their equipment. Nothing had happened pretty well all night up till about 2 a.m. and they were just packing up. They were looking down at the area just before heading off home, when one of them spotted a dull yellow light. It looked like a sort of a small reflection off glass near the ground, that kind of thing. Nothing to notice. But then it started getting bigger and bigger, and so they decided, okay, well, let's unpack the equipment and have a look. So one guy took his camera out that had infrared film in it. The other person took a pair of Generation 3 night vision binoculars out of the bag and started monitoring what was going on below. Through the night vision binoculars, he saw this three-dimensional tunnel. The actual light that had expanded to about 4 feet in diameter now through his night vision binoculars looked like a three-dimensional tunnel. And in the tunnel, he saw movement. Now, at the same time, the guy who was taking photographs could only see this 4-foot diameter dull yellow light down there. He could not see this three-dimensional tunnel. And through this tunnel, this large black humanoid was crawling. It crawled out actually through the tunnel, got out of the tunnel, and vanished into the night. It literally used the shoulders to emerge from the tunnel. And this guy was watching this through night vision binoculars.
Hold it right there, Colm. We'll be right back from the... I wonder if it didn't crawl out of that glowing hole in the dark and slowly move away, only later to become the governor of California. Okay. Welcome back, Colm. Here's where I want to go now very quickly. I do want to get to phones, let people ask questions here in a minute. But, you just told me some pretty wild stuff, and yet I know it to be true. And I also know what I saw and have seen to be true. So, this stuff is, on the one hand, going on. On the other hand, we don't have the physical evidence. So it demands that we start looking at, it seems like to me, things like the possibility of other dimensions, the possibility of life after death and some influence coming from that, behind that curtain, or even time travel, some of these pretty esoteric, strange things. But, hey, they've got to be considered, don't they?
Yeah, the ranch also had physical, dead cows on the ranch. So that was pretty physical too. So one of the things that we were able to do was look at, there was a calf that had being killed over a very, very short period of time.
Yes.
On the property in daylight with a couple of people about 300 yards away, and we were able to use the techniques of veterinary forensics to absolutely establish that this animal had not been killed by a predator, but had sharp instruments had been used on the animal, and a couple of different types of sharp instruments, like a large machete type instrument and a small, more fine knife kind of instrument. So we were able to use the tools of forensics to at least establish that this was not some sort of a predator attack. But again, it did not establish the who in this situation.
Right.
And on the same property, we had a whole litany of animals that just disappear into thin air, and I'm talking like over a dozen since NIDS has purchased that property. And this particular property, it's not all that easy to lose animals. I mean, it's a 480-acre property and can be searched pretty easily. But in spite of that, close to a dozen animals have never been recovered from the property. That's in addition to the animals that have died on the property.
Well, then, again, some of these more esoteric things, like I know, for example, that NIDS has spent some effort. You know, there's a big life after death controversy, of course, probably always will be. I don't know if we'll ever find out until our own moment comes, but I know that NIDS looked at that. And there was a whole rash for many years of life after death and near-death experiences and all the rest of that. So you've sort of given that a cursory look, at least, haven't you?
Yes, we have. We had several of our board members who were specifically focused on near-death experiences. And
any conclusions
beyond the obvious in terms of that it is not just simply a hallucination that has been looked at. We don't have any conclusions about near-death experiences. In other words, we have no tie-in to the UFO phenomenon either.
Okay.
There's a long tradition in the Native American traditions that do associate these objects, especially orbs and orbs of light, with the afterlife, and that the particular ranch up in Utah was host to numerous different types of orbs.
Oh no,
orbs,
I hadn't heard that.
White orbs, yeah. There's many different traditions in the Native American culture associate those orbs with the souls of the dead.
Yes. And then there's time travel. I mean, there's every reason. It doesn't take a great imaginative mind to think that, well, one day time travel may well be invented. That day could be far into the future because it takes a very great deal of power. But it might be done. And if so, then there's every reason to believe that we could be visited by people, say, from our future. It's not so unreasonable.
From what I know, the physics of time travel is getting more mainstream all the time. And this kind of physics is published in mainstream journals as a matter of course, whereas maybe 30, 40 years ago that was not the case. But it is not breaking any laws of physics as we know it. So there's really no reason apart from, as you mentioned, the energy that would prevent time travel.
Mm-hmm.
But whether these creatures or whatever they are coming back from another time, we have no way of knowing.
But it's just one of those things that it is so frustrating. I mean, they fly in our skies, they crawl through holes that people see, they do all these things that people see without leaving physical trace and smoking guns. So I don't know, it kind of forces you into these areas. Let's kind of explore the phones and see what we get. First time caller line, you're on the air with Colm Kelleher. Hello.
Good morning. How are you today?
I'm fine. Where are you?
Abilene, Texas.
Okay.
I had a question for him. Is that not back in the mid-70s? If he had any ideas, there were lots of reports of cattle mutilation. I was in the Air Force, at Cannon Air Force Base at Clovis, New Mexico, from 1974 to 1977. But back in 1975 and 76, around Melrose, New Mexico, where we had a bomb range, we had lots of reports of cattle mutilation. And I wonder if any of the studies have been done in that area.
Okay, this was in Clovis?
Yes, sir, Clovis, New Mexico.
Clovis, New Mexico. Did NIDS do anything with that? Lots of cattle mutilations at that?
We looked at quite a few cattle mutilations in northern New Mexico. Now, Clovis, you said it was in the south?
He said, yes, he said 74 and particularly 75.
74 and 1975. We know in the area up around Dulce, New Mexico, which is around Highway 84, there were dozens of cattle mutilations around that same time. Well, a few years later, actually, it was more like 1978, 1979, but it's still in roughly the same period. They were investigated by a highway patrol officer there called Gay Valdez. And Gabe Valdez worked as an investigator for NIDS for several years. NIDS as an organization investigated several cases in New Mexico of cattle mutilations, primarily around Taos, New Mexico, Dulce, and the northern part. But we have not looked at the southern part. I'm interested in the southern part because we did not have any data about cattle mutilations in that area.
Okay. While we're on the subject of New Mexico, there was a recent article, again, this has been a recurring theme for years and years and years, about this doggone hum and noise that appears to come from under the ground, literally to the degree where it keeps people awake in parts of New Mexico and elsewhere, I might add. Something going on underground, some vibration, some hum. Has NIDS ever gone to look at that?
No, we have not. I mean, we've heard of the Taos hum, and I believe there's another location where there's a hum too, but we've never looked into it. No.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Wildcard line, you're on the air with Colm Kelleher. Hello.
Hello, Art. This is Fred from Portview, Pennsylvania.
Hi, Fred.
I have a question for you and one for. I've had several experiences with UFOs, sightings, and 4 possible abductions. I would like to ask your guest, has he ever done any, or his organization ever done any research on people that claim to be abductees, their brain patterns being different from other people that have never been abducted? I've been told by Stanton Friedman and Pete Davenport, several other MUFON researchers, that the abductees seem to be operating, or people that see UFOs tend to have they operate on a different frequency, so to speak.
Okay, so all right, that's a very reasonable question because it has a scientific basis if it's true. Any difference in recorded brain patterns from abductees to non?
I do know of a confidential study that's underway right now with MRI that is looking at exactly that question.
Oh, confidential, is it?
It is unfortunately confidential because of the location of where it's happening. But it is. If anybody wants to contact me offline, I can give them some information about it. But it is looking exactly at brain patterns in people who are reporting abductions versus people who are not, and looking at those brain patterns under a variety of circumstances
That's
to see if there's any differences.
Okay. East of the Rockies, you're on the air with Colm Kelleher. Hello.
Hello, Art. Colm.
Hello.
Hi.
Yeah. I I wanted to make three little statements here about maybe the triangles being dirigibles. Now, I saw the Goodyear blimp before it was retired last year, and it had, turbo fans or something on it, and you could hear it distinctly about 300 feet in the air. So if this big triangle's like 3 times that big, it'd have to have at least 6, 8 of these engines, okay? Now, as for going 100,000 feet in the air, it would tear that thing to pieces, how it would get up that high with all the winds. And the last one is, over the Air Force bases, couldn't they put a mode seed transponder in there and make it look like a C-130, even though it didn't move like one, but, have records of a C-130 in the area? I mean, these Air Force bases need to know type situations and everything.
Okay, Colm.
Yeah, well, the last point is definitely feasible. But the fact is, there were so many different eyewitnesses, and I'm speaking about the Illinois case, that saw this object going right over them. And in addition to the 4 or 5 cops that saw this object, we went on the ground out there and we beat the bushes. We got an additional 20 eyewitnesses, many of whom saw this object up close and personal. And there was absolutely no way it was anything like a C-130, but it could have had a transponder signature that corresponded to a C-130 that was picked up. That's definitely possible. In terms of the other questions, the information that we've got for this thing this is not a dirigible in the usual understanding of dirigible. This is a very sturdy, high-tech composite object. In other words, we're not talking about just a standard dirigible that goes up to 100,000 feet. This thing is built for those altitudes.
Okay, what about the propulsion, though? There still should have been some noise, because even if it's helium or whatever filled or something that light that makes it float, it still have to have some kind of propulsion.
Yeah, and some of the eyewitnesses and some of the witnesses that report these objects do talk about a very low-frequency hum sometimes associated. Some people say, yeah, these things are silent, but other people talk about a very a barely discernible hum.
Well, I know that we have come a long way with sound cancellation technology. So it might be possible to virtually cancel or nearly cancel the sound of propulsion, I suppose, on the ground. We're making so many advances that it's getting more and more difficult to discern U.S. Experimental aircraft, certainly, from those that would be from another planet. And that's saying something all by itself, isn't it?
Yes, it is, and I think we're right in the middle of that whole thing with this black triangle enigma. Now, one thing I did not mention is that the United Kingdom has also had a huge number of black triangle sightings, beginning in 96, or actually 94, 95. So they've had at least as many as the United States has. So this is not confined just to North America.
All right, west of the Rockies, you're on the air with Colm Kelleher. Hello.
Hi, Art. This is Christine from California. I'm a huge fan. I was so shocked to get through. You scared me when you answered the phone.
I'm sorry?
Well, I just, it's pretty much a comment than a question, I guess. The way when you were talking about the physical evidence,
yes.
It always pans out to be, something mundane. I remember the story about the snail. I think it was on when George was on that story. I heard it. But it just seems like, they're toying with us, on purpose, doesn't it? Doesn't it seem that way to you almost?
Well, that is a question. Are they toying with us?
Well, I definitely have heard that before, that it would almost go back to the Vallée hypothesis of deliberate absurdity, that that it's part of a some kind of a learning curve, which is not inconsistent with this whole leaky embargo thing. That game playing and all of that is part of psychology. It's part of learning. It could be toying with us, or it could be attempting to educate us in some way. We've noticed when we were on the property in northeastern Utah, many of the occurrences appeared to be like some kind of a head game, and I think that the ripping out of the wires out of the cameras, like I described there a while back, fits exactly into that category.
I mean, that's almost into the poltergeist category.
That is, and it's kind of like toying with the usual way of approaching things. And the other thing that we noticed with the Utah property was that there was never any repeated incidences. So you could never get comfortable, okay, I know how to deal with this particular thing, and then something completely different would come in out of left field. So you were always in that sort of state of never knowing what to expect. So
or it always being one step ahead of you.
Exactly. And so, this, like the lady had asked, it is a variation on that theme.
Somehow, somewhere in all of this, there must be something that tells us what really is going on. We just haven't found it yet.
That's a very good summary of what's been happening on this property. We attempted on multiple different occasions to have some kind of communication going with whatever was going on there, and we even had alphabet type bricks arranged in different patterns to see if those patterns were changed.
What were they ever?
They were never.
They were never changed.
Never changed.
All right, Colm, hold on. Colm Kelleher from NIDS is my guest. No physical evidence, but no shortage of anecdotal eyewitness type reports either. So, what do you make of all this? Tomorrow night, for example, I'm going to be interviewing a very interesting fellow called George Green, who has had contact with aliens, and it's another very close contact case, and it'll be fascinating to interview him. But it's one more in a very long line of all this anecdotal evidence and no physical evidence. It is, it's incredibly frustrating for researchers and people who report on this sort of thing. And I hope, Colm, in your tenure that something resolves, or do you think that it's more likely not?
Well, I think the track record is definitely where I think it's ambiguous, and I don't see necessarily it changing all that much. The abduction, I think one of your guests mentioned abduction. We did a so-called multiple witness study with Professor John Mack on the abduction, and we focused on multiple witnesses in order to see if there was any way of corroborating from more than one person with abduction, to see, in other words, are we talking physical abduction? We're talking metaphysical abduction.
Right.
And it started off with 200 cases, and various criteria focused on about 13 cases that went into in considerable depth. Lots of interviews of the abductees, and it was the numbers were brought down to 5 who were of special interest. From those 5 were looked at with a lot of detail and corroboration and all of that. It turned out that under scrutiny, each of those 5 individuals or groups of individuals who had been abducted in the same time in the same place, there was sufficient ambiguity in each of those cases to never corroborate the physical aspect of abduction. So, 200 to 13 to 5 to essentially
zero.
There was no smoking gun in that caseload that would definitively say that person X was watching as person Y was abducted, or vice versa, or person X and person Y were simultaneously abducted, and there was corroboration of that.
You've given people a lot to think about tonight. First time caller line, you're on the air with Colm Kelleher. Hello.
Good morning. This is Mike from Dover, Delaware.
Hello, Mike.
Hi. I just wanted to ask a little bit more about what happened at the ranch.
Okay.
What was the time frame relation between when this figure crawled out of the tube and when the camera equipment was damaged? Was that before or after?
It was before. The creature crawled out of the tube in August of '97, and the cameras were damaged, I believe, in June or July of '98.
Okay.
And the incidents occurred about 500 yards from each other. In other words, the cameras were ripped out about 500 yards away from where the creature crawled out. Now, that particular aspect of the creature crawling out, I meant to emphasize, was seen only through the infrared binoculars.
Well, you said the other saw a yellow circular light of some sort or something
right.
like that.
That's all they could see
Right.
when that was happening.
Right. Gotcha. Caller, enough?
Yes, that's great. Thanks a lot.
All right. You're very welcome. Wildcard line, you're on the air with Colm Kelleher. Hello.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Yeah, you guys mentioned the lack of physical evidence. I know individuals such as Dr. Roger Lear and Daryl Sims have done some very intriguing research into the alien implant phenomenon.
Absolutely correct, yes.
Yeah, I wonder if you might have any comments, Colin, on that. And
actually, he does. He made some earlier, but let's do it again. Indeed, Dr. Lear and others have removed implanted things from human beings, but you maintain, Colm, do you not, that all of them can be traced to terrestrial materials of one kind or another?
I can only speak for the 2 implants that were examined by NIDS, and those 2 did not yield any evidence of being anything other than mundane. So I know there was something like 8 additional ones that were removed, but after the first 2 were removed, examined, put through metallurgical analysis, and the results were pretty well, normal or mundane. The NIDS Science Advisory Board decided at that stage to terminate further cases of implant analysis.
Gotcha. In other words, every time you hit a brick wall with regard to physical evidence, you move on to another area where you might find it. Is that the way it's kind of working?
That's the way it has worked in the past, yeah.
Yeah, okay, good enough. East of the Rockies, you're on the air with Colm Kelleher. Hello.
Yes, sir. This is Anthony in Columbia, Missouri.
Hi, Anthony.
I had more of a statement. According to Neil Donald Walsh and the Conversation with God trilogy
yes.
that I've been reading, he states or insinuates in the book that higher evolved beings, or what they call Hebs, are helping us, some, and especially the last 70 years or so, and watching us for their own benefit as well, because what we do or don't do affects the whole universe as a whole, just as a tragedy in a large metropolis affects the whole nation.
Mm-hmm.
And we are to learn our lessons on our own, and that in ancient times we had greater technology than we do now, and we're getting close again, but we're doing the same screw-ups that we did back then that caused us to to destroy ourselves then, and their job is to not interfere, because at some point we have to learn like a child on our own.
All right. Do you hold on a sec. Do you think that the prime directive, Colm, is valid? In other words, not to interfere in any way, to watch, perhaps to, well, I don't know, I guess not interfere in any physical manner with our development?
Well, that argument goes both ways. If that is the case, then why are we being inundated with UFO sightings and close encounters, interactions with beings, communications, all of that, of everything except physical evidence, in other words. So you would imagine if there was a scenario like the gentleman suggested, then why would we even observe these craft? I mean, there is a display aspect to the UFO phenomenon. There always has been.
Clearly.
You know, these things are floating down interstate highways at 300 feet in altitude, where they're being witnessed by hundreds of people. So even that fact alone is a form of communication, even though it does not, doesn't entail physical evidence that we can hang our hat on.
Gotcha. West of the Rockies, you're on the air with Colm Kelleher. Hello.
Hello.
Hi.
Colin, are you familiar yet with the case in Montana a little over a year ago, the Talleyrand case, the Red Angus cow head that you worked on for a number of months?
Yes.
Do you know what your final conclusion was on that?
Final conclusion on that was there was a compound called oxandole that was found at higher levels in the eye fluid of that animal than a sham mutilated animal. And by sham mutilated animal, I mean an animal that was retrieved from the slaughterhouse, left on the ground in a protected way away from scavengers and predators for 2 or 3 days, just like the Talleyrand animal was left. And then that eye fluid was put through exactly the same chemical analysis. When we did that experiment, we found in the mutilated animal up in Montana that oxandole seemed to be present in the eye fluid of that animal. Now,
yes, thank you. What is
oxandole is at high levels is a sedative. It will cause animals or humans to lose consciousness. So one possibility of finding oxandole in that animal was that the oxandole was used as a sedative. Now, I should also mention that at very low levels, oxandole is present in these animals, but not at the levels that we found it at.
Have you ever communicated with Paul Levengood? Dr. Paul Levengood?
You mean Lefty Levengood?
Yeah,
Paul Levengood.
I assume we're talking about the same. Yes, I have.
Yes, of course.
Yes,
Dr.
I
have. And how do you regard his research, specifically with his ability to delineate between crop circles that have been hoaxed and those that he regards as genuine?
I think what Dr. Levengood has done is extremely interesting. I don't think it's an open and shut case that microwaves are used in these plants. I think there may be other forms of energy that are used that have not been examined. But I think Dr. Levengood has done some really interesting work.
Yes, but with regard to what appears to be microwave radiation, or whatever the effect is,
right?
Is it a good measure, do you believe, Colm, in delineating between the man-made baloney and the real McCoy?
In order to really answer that question properly, what I would love to do, and it has never been done to my knowledge, is to take the same plants that Dr. Levengood has looked at and look at them from a completely different angle, in other words, a cellular angle, in order to see if what Dr. Levengood has found is corroborated. And we have never done that because most of the focus that NIDS has focused on has been on the UFO topic.
Got you. Although there is a relationship, as you well know. East of the Rockies, you're on the air with Colm Kelleher. Hello.
Colm, over 40 years ago, I was an OSI agent, so I have some firsthand information about OSI.
Yeah.
Let me talk to the issue of black triangles.
Yeah.
Yes.
All U.S. UFOs are triangular in shape. All other UFOs are circular or have other shapes. It has to do with the center of gravity, but the black triangles are all U.S. The technology is, we've been given no technology. This is something that we developed.
So you know a very great deal about them, obviously, right?
Well, I think so.
All right, so what technology allows them to silently propel themselves at 30 miles an hour, seemingly not aerodynamically traveling at all?
Well, that's energy that comes from under our feet.
Uh-huh.
Energy that comes from under our feet?
Right.
What does that mean?
Well, those are emissions from the core of the Earth, or from all live planets.
That allow them to travel. So are you talking about some sort of gravitational propulsion system?
Well, it would be magnetic and gravity and other forces.
Well, have you worked on these programs?
I'm just familiar with them.
Okay. Is there any way that we could email? You could email me?
Sure.
The email address for NIDS is NIDS, NIDS, at ANV, AlbertNormanVictor.net.
Okay.
I'd really appreciate an email from you.
Actually, there are two locations that are involved, and they're close together. The black triangles are about 7 miles north of the location that other entities, craft, would leave the Earth. And
all right. Well, if you would please follow up with email. We're not heavy on time here. West of the Rockies, you're on the air with Colm Kelleher. Hello.
Yes, hello.
Hi. Turn your radio off, please.
It's off.
Good. Go ahead.
Yes, hi. I was just wondering if you had ever considered anything with Admiral Byrd. Are you familiar with Admiral Byrd?
Oh, yes.
Admiral Byrd?
Yes.
From what perspective?
With the perspective of the hollow Earth, the hollow moon.
All right. Well, why not? We'll do a little bit of this column. There have been many reports of UFOs coming up out of the ocean, some of them literally coming out of the earth, that sort of thing. I don't know about hollow earth, but there have been reports of activity that would appear to be within the earth.
Yes, we've had several reports of allegedly these objects flying right down into, say, a mountain or something, and not crashing. Or we've also had reports of objects of coming out of the sea, the seawater, or going into. We've had several objects actually that were detected underwater by submarine sonar.
That's right.
Moving at in excess of 50 knots, which.
Yes.
And this was mostly in the China Sea back in the 1950s, where these objects, this kind of technology was not available.
Yes, I'm aware of this. They would seem to move through the earth when they do, and through the sea, just as we would move almost through the air, in some sort of airplane. It just doesn't seem to matter to them. The density of the ocean or of the land versus the air is as if it didn't exist, the difference.
Yeah, and that was one of the reports I'm thinking of specifically in the China Sea was monitoring that with sonar, because apparently propellers make cavitation patterns in the water.
That's correct, yes.
And these were not detected from these objects that were moving at greater than 50 knots. So whatever propulsion was being used was not the standard propeller propulsion.
Have you, Colm, written a book or done anything that you would like to promote here at the end of the program?
Not at this time. No.
No book.
The website, which I think we're having trouble with right now, is
yes, I know. I'm sorry. We apologize.
Is nidsci.org. But the NIDS email address, I would definitely encourage people, like the gentleman who we just talked with, nids@anv.net.
Okay, and I apologize for probably taking your website down. Anything that gets posted up there is visited by many hundreds of thousands of people at one time, and, you know, the result is usually inevitable. It'll go down for a period of time, but it will live again, so keep checking the website, folks.
Well, that's actually a very good thing. If there's that many people out there, I think that's great.
A lot of notches in our website belt, believe me. I want to thank you, Colm, for being here. Say hi to Robert, please, for me.
Yes, I will indeed. I know that he, I think next time you're in Las Vegas, you should look him up.
I know he's looking for me. Colm, thank you.